So I'd like to call the committee meeting to order. As permitted by the governor's disaster declaration of March 31, 2023, the determination has been made. Sorry about that. The determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee to meet in person. To ensure a transparent and open meeting as possible, we will post the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance. We'll provide a recording of this meeting linked on our website, and we'll take all votes by roll call. So staff has some additional virtual meeting logistic announcements before we take the roll. Let me turn it back to staff.
Thank you very much. As Chair Tucker mentioned, this meeting is being recorded. Please use the mute function when not speaking, as this will help eliminate excessive background noise. And you can use the mute button on your computer, or those of you on the phone can press *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Members of the public, if you have a question during the meeting, please use the chat box, which staff will be monitoring. Additionally, if you wish to address the committee during the public comment agenda item, you can indicate your desire to do so in the chat box. Members of the committee, when making a motion, please include your full name so staff can properly record it. That concludes our announcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Now, if the staff could please take the roll call.
Bob Tucker.
Here.
Kim Porter.
Here.
Adam Ballard. Dion Bowe. Peter Creticos. Christy De Laurentiis.
Here.
Joan Fox.
Here.
Kendra Freeman.
Here.
Kevin Kramer.
Here.
Marissa Lewis.
Here.
Tiffany McDowell.
Here.
Shannon McGee. Michael Myers.
Here.
Josh Porter. Obai E. Reed. Caitlin Ritter. Darnell Shields. Jennifer Tamman. Michael Horsting.
Here.
Tara Orban.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Outstanding. Thank you. So a couple agenda changes and announcements. First, an announcement. John Furr has accepted a position as Chief Data Ecosystem Officer at Strata Education Network in Washington, D.C. Don't know why they didn't choose me for that. And has therefore stepped down from the committee. We thank him for his service and wish him luck as he transitions into his new position. We now have 2 vacancies on the committee and look forward to new members joining us very soon. So we also have one agenda change this morning. Item 4.05, an overview of the capacity building program of work that's under development, is being postponed to the next committee meeting. If there's any objection to that, please voice it now. Great. Hearing none, are there any other agenda changes? Okay. We're going to move on to the executive director's announcements. Deputy of Planning Stephanie Pfeiffer is with us today and has a few words for the committee. Stephanie.
Good morning, all the committee members. Happy to be with you this morning to give you a few updates on behalf of Aaron about CMAP this morning. First off, the governor's disaster declaration ends on May 11th. Which means that all public bodies in Illinois are required to hold in-person meetings under the Open Meetings Act or OMA. That means that for the next regional economy committee meeting, a quorum of the members will need to be physically present for this committee. And as Dominic mentioned, that is 11 members. So under OMA, if a quorum of the committee is physically present, then the members can request virtual participation if the situation meets the conditions outlined in the OMA law and our bylaws. The request would need to be approved by a majority of the committee. So what that means is if there are individuals that are required to participate virtually, we can accommodate that. But we do need to, as of May 11th, start holding our meetings in person. In line with CMAP's mission and values, we will continue to allow for public participation virtually. The CMAP board approved an updated public participation policy for themselves and the CMAP committees, which allows for this. You can find a copy of that on the CMAP's website under committees. Next thing I wanted to cover was our annual report. It's my pleasure to present CMAP's 2022 annual report. We've had a busy year with lots of exciting work to share with you and all of our partners. The report looks back at significant progress made over the last calendar year and provides highlights around improving the region's transportation system, addressing climate resiliency, and ensuring we have a thriving economy while embracing all of equity through an equity lens, embracing all of this through an equity lens, sorry. So related to the regional economy, the report spotlights the Greater Chicagoland Economic Partnership, the collaboration among 7 counties and the city of Chicago to drive inclusive growth and advance equity across the region. We moved through 2023 and beyond. We look forward to continuing to serve and shape and solve things together with the amazing staff we have here at CMAP, with you, our committee members, and with all of our partners across the region. So excited about that annual report and excited about continuing that work into 2023. The next thing I wanted to just update everyone on is the state of the region and our public opinion survey. We also launched our second State of the Region program last month. This program provides attention to current public sentiment on key issues facing our region and spotlights the excellent work happening to advance our shared vision and goal of an inclusive and thriving region. We conducted a public opinion survey of Northeastern Illinois residents to better understand their priorities, experiences, and how Onto 2050 can address the most pressing issues of our region. Overall, residents' outlook remained fairly consistent since our last survey in the fall of 2021, but we found increasing concerns around economic issues, which is understandable, particularly the cost of housing. However, most residents remain confident and optimistic about their employment and satisfied with their access to good jobs. It's also important to note that more than 2/3 of the residents increasingly support collaboration among local governments to help develop jobs, transportation, and housing. Those are just a few of the findings from the survey. I do encourage you to visit our website and learn more about the survey and the other results that are out there. Next, with regards to the state of our region, we have the Regional Excellence Awards. As part of our State of the Region program, we also solicited nominations for our Regional Excellence Awards to recognize and celebrate partners' achievements and their exceptional work. So please check out our Regional Excellence Awards page to watch the videos about our award winners who helped our region become more accessible, equitable, and sustainable. For example, 2 development projects that won Equity with Impact Award was the Auburn Gresham Healthy Lifestyle Hub, a major redevelopment project to address community gaps in healthcare, healthy food options, banking, and education on Chicago's South Side. And the Bloomhaven development in Aurora, which turned a blighted health facility into a mixed-use development, delivering essential services and amenities to the residents of different ages and abilities. Next, I wanted to give you an update finally on provide the group a brief legislative update. As you know, CMAP's top state legislative priority this season is securing funding to support implementation of the Regional Planning Act to enable our statute that was our enabling statute, sorry. While the Act directs us to work in climate resiliency, water resources management, economic development, housing, and many more, we do not receive funding from the state to carry out this work. We have been working towards an appropriations bill that would provide us with some additional resources to deepen these program areas. We have several senators and other elected officials that have been supporting us on this journey. Senator Ram Villaham and Senator Don DeWitt have filed SB 1429 on the Senate side, and Representative Marty Mulan and Representative Dan Ugatsty have filed HB 4027 on the House side to make these appropriations. So we really appreciate their support. CMAP's legislative staff is working to incorporate these bills into the state's FY24 budget. We know you care about CMAP's regional economic work, and you can provide comment to the House and Senate budgeteers about these proposals. On the House side, that representative is Robin Gable, and on the Senate side, that representative is Senator LG Sims. We think that they would find the committee's perspective very helpful and informative. So please reach out to our legislative team if you have any questions. And this priority has been long in the making and would really support the committee's voice supporting these additional funds to round out our work, especially our work in regional economy. So with that, Mr. Chair, that is the CMAP updates.
That's a lot. That's great stuff. It'll be really good to see people in person. There will be plentiful and quality coffee at that meeting. That's part of the chair's post-disaster declaration. That's my own declaration. Let's move on. Any questions though, at all? That was a lot of stuff. Any questions? Okay, well, great. Let's keep moving. A copy of the minutes from the January 26, 2023 meeting were included in the meeting packet. It's kind of a best practice, and because staff knows how bad my memory is, we're going to spend some more time in our meetings discussing the minutes to ensure continuity. Staff is going to share some highlights now.
Thank you, Chair, and happy Take Your Kid to Work Day to everybody who participates. I'm not sure who scheduled a meeting on Take Your Kid to Work Day, but now I remember it was me. So I have no one to blame for me. So thank you, Chair. And I think the update of the minutes from the last meeting really show, as Stephanie talked about previously, on what we're looking to do with the committee moving forward in terms of having not just a standalone meetings, but meetings building on each other and being connected to each other. So at the previous meeting that we had in January, we had an update. We had an update provided by Tony Mano on the Jobs Access and Quality Assessment Tool, and we'll have an update here on this meeting as well. Tony at the last meeting talked about how the tool can be used to leverage and target investment, and members McDowell, Lewis, Creticos, and Kramer provided feedback, and we appreciate that. And that shows an example that we would like. I'm sorry to be like Saturday Night Live and breaking up. My kids are actually fighting right next to me. The members provided an update, and I think that demonstrates how we're going to show moving forward, wanting to engage members on projects and tools we bring forward. I'm sorry. And that's what they were like to do. We also had a part update, which will continue, and our distinguished liaison, Elizabeth Ginsburg, talked about sales tax in terms of how that would impact what we're doing right there, and what we're going to be talking about part in this meeting as well. So it's a continuing flow throughout the various committees that we have each time, building on what we had previously. So that's what we talked about previously, and that kind of leads into the agenda we have today. And thank you for your understanding about everything going on, and I appreciate it.
Oh, please. Honestly, it's probably going to be the highlight of my day. Dominic, can you swing the camera so we can see those two rascals real quick?
Yeah, right here.
Hey, all right. Outstanding. Love it.
And I'm sorry, water spilled, and it's a Parks and Rec moment right there. So I'll thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dominic. Are there any requested changes or corrections to the minutes? Okay. Hearing none, can I get a motion and a second to approve the minutes, please?
This is Kevin Kramer. I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Kevin. Is there a second?
Kim Porter, second.
I think Kim slipped it in, got second place on that. Thank you, Kim. Are there any questions on the motion? All right, hearing none, can we have a roll call, please?
Bob Tucker,
Yes.
Kim Porter,
Yes.
Christy De Laurentiis,
Aye.
Joan Fox,
Aye.
Kendra Freeman,
Aye.
Kevin Kramer,
Aye.
Marissa Lewis,
Aye.
Tiffany McDowell,
Aye.
Michael Myers,
Aye.
and those are all our voting members. The motion carries.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. So we're moving on in the agenda. Our next item is the proposed CMAP strategic direction. Dominic's children are going to give us an overview. Wait, no, I'm sorry. Alex, Director of Strategic Alignment and Innovation, is going to give us an overview of that.
Thank you, Chair Tucker. I wish Dominic's children could give this presentation. That would be a lot more exciting. So I just wanted to provide an update and some follow-up to this committee around the strategic direction, because our 5-year strategic plan has actually been finalized and approved, and we've shared it in your agenda packet. So hopefully you had a chance to review the document, and specifically the economy focus area. We really tried to incorporate the really useful feedback that you provided last year as part of the finalized document. So I'm going to run through how we've kind of finalized the strategic direction, give a little bit of a refresher, and then share with you how that's going to influence our multi-year work planning, because we want this specific document to influence the way that we develop 5-year program areas at CMAP so that we can be a lot more strategic about our work. Next slide, please. So to recap, over the past 9 months or so, we incorporated feedback from this and from other committees. We also held 10 workshops with our staff, had some executive level workshops, and we've finalized the strategic direction and distributed it to the board and the committees. And then we began, after that, the process of developing these 5-year program areas aligned to the strategic direction. These are organized around our focus areas of transportation, regional economic competitiveness, and climate. Next slide, please. So in our 3 focus areas, we've actually already got some program areas that we've been developing as we've finalized the strategic direction. And those include some of our, let's say, like flagship or priority programs. So those include PART, the Plan of Action for Regional Transit, which you're going to hear about a little bit later on the agenda, and just about every meeting for the rest of the year because it's so important. We've also got the Safe Travel for All roadmap. In the climate space, we have our Transportation Resiliency Improvement Plan, or TRIP, work in flood mitigation and air and water quality. And in the economy space, you've already heard a good deal about the Greater Chicagoland Economic Partnership, one of our really important things that we're working on. At the intersection of some of those focus areas, we've also got really important work. We've got this year a new carbon reduction program that we'll be launching. We also have our work in ADA planning, which really kind of straddles all 3 focus areas, but it's one where, even though it's mainly a transportation focus in that work, we are paying very close attention to the economic benefits of ADA planning and making our downtown corridors accessible. Next slide, please. So we organized the strategic direction around a modified theory of change, and that includes what we're calling approach pathways. So the way we went through this planning process is we started with our goal. What did we really want to achieve that is achievable? Thought about the objectives that would feed into that goal, the outcomes we wanted to see that would make those objectives happen, and then the approaches we would take to feed into those outcomes. The way we will tackle those approaches is through a series of activities, which are basically our projects at CMAP. Next slide, please. And then the way we'll do that work is organized around what we're calling CMAP's levers. Through this process, we really wanted to think specifically about what CMAP's lane is, how CMAP can influence change and directly make an impact on the region. So the 3 levers that we've settled on are that CMAP, as you might know already, one of our main levers is to plan regionally and locally. So the regional plan is a huge part of our work, but also our local planning and our local technical assistance. We also influence change through our data analysis, modeling, our policy recommendations, and other tools. And then lastly, we invest strategically through our programming and through leveraging pretty significant amount of federal funding across the region. We also foster coalitions that advance coordinated solutions, and we want to promote meaningful public participation through that process, convening our stakeholders and making sure we can all work together as one. Next slide, please. So now that we have the strategic direction in place, we've got a lot of exciting work ahead. In 2023, in this month, we kicked off this development process for program areas. And we've also, we're also thinking about how this process will influence our annual work plan, We're going to be doing a modified approach to our annual work plan once we've got some of these program charters in place. And I'm excited to share that we'd love your feedback as we're developing our annual work plan. This is something that we'd really like to be more strategic about. So what we're going to do is develop these draft program charters for 5-year work plans. We're going to bring those to the committee over the next few years as we develop this work so that we can make sure we're doing it in partnership with you and really being strategic about how we develop programs. And then July and August of this year, we're going to draft our annual work plan from those multi-year charters. And we'd love to be able to bring the focus area in economy to this committee to hear your feedback on our work and how we're prioritizing our work and make sure that we're paying close attention to what our partners in the region and our constituents really need. Then what we will be happy to do is bring our work plan and budget back to this committee so that we can confirm what we've settled on for our draft budget, and then we can keep you more looped into the work plan and budget process. Every year, the budget and work plan is, and it's basically a year-long process, but it really kicks into high gear in the fall. And in November and December, we really try to finalize all of those details, and then they're approved by the board in their January meeting and by the MPO Policy Committee in their February meeting of 2024. Next slide, please. So in the economy space, I just wanted to highlight that we do have our finalized approaches and outcomes and objectives included in that document. These do reflect your feedback and hopefully can really focus our work and maximize our impact over the next few years. You can see some of the work we've already talked about reflected in these approaches, such as our work on the Greater Chicagoland Economic Partnership, our work in housing, our work in building capacity for local communities. Some of the indicators that we're going to use to tie to the outcome level of this focus area include things like job creation, population growth, and businesses brought to the region. They'll also include things like freight electrification, money that's been programmed to support transit-oriented development, commute times, and the income of neighborhood near transit facilities. One of the things I most appreciated about our committee engagement, especially through some of your survey responses, were really thoughtful indicators that I think we're going to try to incorporate into our multi-year program development and also share back with you so that we can track our progress and make sure that we're measuring our success. Next slide, please. So in our other main objective to increase access to economic opportunities, I don't want to read through everything because I know there's a lot of words on the slide, but I just wanted to highlight that again, we incorporated your feedback and really appreciated it. So in addition to modifying the language in some of these approaches and outcomes and really centering equity in this objective, especially, we've included some of the suggested indicators, such as including the number of communities receiving funding and the number of communities that are connected through transit so that we're really honing in on that transit-oriented development. And then again, job creation, job quality, and measuring hopefully the reduction of disinvestment in some of these communities. So I encourage you to take a look at the document. I would love to hear more of your feedback over the next few years as we continue developing these program areas aligned to this short-term plan. And I'm happy to take any questions that you might have today. Thank you.
Wow, that was a lot, Alex. Thank you so much. Your updates are always outstanding. Really appreciate it. Any questions from the committee members? I know that was a lot. Oh, looks like we're gonna save you that pain, Alex. All right, hearing none, we're gonna move on to the next item. The next item is an update from Tony on the job access and quality assessment tool, which we discussed in the meeting last time in January. Tony.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Chair Tucker, Vice Chair Porter. Nice to see everyone. I'm back. Really just to say hello and to say thank you to you all for the great discussion we did have in January regarding the job access and quality assessment tool. Special thanks to Kevin Kramer, Peter Kretikos, Marissa Lewis, and Dr. McDowell for taking the tool for a test drive for us in advance of the meeting and providing some wonderful feedback. I'm here today to, again, thank you for that feedback and also to let you know that thanks to your wonderful feedback, we re-engaged TIP strategies. bringing them back on to open up the tool and make some updates to it and some revisions based on what you told us in January. So I laid out a scope of work, essentially what you asked us to. So we're going to create a steering committee. It will consist of a subset of you all. Hopefully there are some that are interested in doing so, but I think there will also be opportunities for you all to weigh in on this at a future meeting, especially on what we do with this tool, especially in the context of the larger multi-year economic development program that we're developing here that Alex just discussed. So we'll create a steering committee or a task force, I think as Kevin called it. We will put together an engagement and implementation strategy. I think that's the key here, is figuring out how we can get this tool in the hands of our partners throughout the region and to use it accordingly for economic development decision-making. We're going to make sure we have the most recent data to it. And I love that Marissa and some others talked about how, especially in the nursing job area that she looked at, how we addressed what is required for that job, but we didn't catch everything. We didn't catch the additional certifications or otherwise. And so I think the consultants and CMAP want to see if we can dig into that a little bit deeper and either figure out a way to incorporate some of that or at least address it through the user guide and methodology that we also want to create for this tool, so others, so our partners know exactly how to use it and what they're getting when they're using it. And then we do want to spend some time, and I think this is especially where you all will continue to be very helpful, is to further refine what we mean by quality and accessibility, define it or change those words. I think we talked quite a bit in January about how, are those the right words to use? Are there better terms to use, better indicators, etc.? So loved the thoughtful feedback on that and want to dig deeper on that with you and other stakeholders throughout the region as we embark on this project. So thank you again for that feedback. As Alex just mentioned, I think through our strategic direction, we really want to take feedback from all of you, help us drive policy, and show you how we're using your feedback. And hopefully this is one small way that we're doing it, because it does mean a lot to me and the staff here that you took the time to take a look at this tool and give us some meaningful feedback. And we want to show you how we're incorporating that. So this is our way of doing that, at least on this small project, and especially as it fits into our larger economic development work. We're working on the contracting now with TIP Strategies. I am hopeful that this project will start in May and probably run through December. With a handful of touch points with the steering committee, the deep dive group, if you will, and then at an upcoming meeting, there will be more to come on that for the larger group. If you are interested in embarking on this implementation 2.0 project with us, please let our wonderful liaisons know, and I'll be in touch with you. But I think, again, there will be ways for everybody to weigh in on it. But if there's a few of you on this committee that really want to take a deep test drive with us on this, please let Elizabeth and Dominic know. I think that's all I have, but I am absolutely open for questions, other comments, if there's anything you think we missed here. But I think there'll be opportunities throughout the project as well to weigh in. But right now, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Great, thank you, Tony. Always good to see you. Always good to hear from you. I hope people take him up on that offer. But right now, he's here to take any questions you may have. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, let's move along. Next up is a discussion of CMAP's Transportation Project Analysis Tool, TPAT. A video of the presentation was included as part of the agenda. Martin Menninger, who is Program Manager for MPO Active Project Management, is going to start the discussion. Martin, can I turn it over to you?
Sure. So we're calling this the Transportation Project Analysis Tool, and it's really focused on our regionally significant projects. So there was a 6-minute video sent out in advance, but if you missed it, I'm going to cover the key points of that video, and you can go watch it afterwards or just follow up with questions. Next slide. So we hope to evaluate lots of different things with this. The key focus right now is on regionally significant projects. Those are projects that we are required by federal law to evaluate as part of our long-range transportation plan. So they're the biggest projects, generally $100 million, $250 million or more, and changing the capacity of the roadway system. or the transit system. So we've got 71 projects that were included in our fiscally constrained plan that was adopted last year, the Onto 2050 update. And those are split pretty evenly between transit projects, expressway projects, and arterials. So those are things like rebuilding Lakeshore Drive, extending the Red Line, reconstructing highways, things like that, the biggest projects in our region. And CMAP has to include those in our long-range plan to get federal funding. Next slide. So as part of our evaluation, we currently produce a project we call the regionally significant project benefits report. And I'll post a link to that in the chat. That report is largely a PDF of tables. And one thing we'd like to get out of this project is to make that information a little more engaging, a little more useful, both to CMAP and to our stakeholders. The second thing we'd like to get out of this project is make it easier for us to generate that data. So it's not as quite a heavy lift. Potentially we could do it more often than once every 4 years. We talked at the climate committee about North Lakeshore Drive and all of the sort of work we've done in the alternative analysis phase of that project. And this tool could potentially be beneficial there. Next slide. So we've broken this project into 4 steps. The first one is largely complete. That's where we went and looked at some of our peers, both MPOs and key partners, and looked at how they evaluate projects for best practices. Right now, we are kicking off the second phase where we're looking to do some partner outreach. I'll talk about that a little bit more, but this meeting and transportation and climate are all getting presentations this week as part of that outreach. Over the summer, we're going to be continuing to get feedback on what measures to use, but also building scripts and automating and build a tool to help us visualize those results that, like I said, will make it more efficient for CMAP staff to generate some of this data. And then in the fall, we're gonna be thinking about how do we use the data that we're generating to get to decisions. So sort of connecting all of the data and putting it into a framework. And we're keeping that sort of ultimate goal in mind throughout the process, but that'll be sort of the focus of engagement in the fall. Next slide. So as part of the literature review, we have a consultant, High Street Consulting, looked across the country at different peers and grouped measures, performance measures for transportation projects into these 10 categories. Since this is the Regional Economy Committee, I want to call out our past measures have looked at equity impact of RSPs. So specifically use by disadvantaged populations, benefits to key industries, and benefits to disinvested industrial areas, economic impacts from industry clustering, and a freight impact score, among some of these other things that you see on here. One thing we're looking to do is incorporate new information and new priorities. So we talked about the job access and quality assessment tool. That's sort of a new data source for us. And we're looking at if we can incorporate that or replace a prior measure or improve a prior measure. In addition to sort of picking up some of the best practices from around the country. Next slide. All right, so I've got a few questions for you. First is we're kicking off our engagement phase. How would you like us to engage with you? Do you have information you'd like to share with us or data that we should be incorporating into our project evaluation? How can we make the data we generate more useful to you and other key stakeholders? And then what are sort of your thoughts about past evaluation or your goals for what we should do in the future? With that, I'll open it up to comments from the group.
Great, thanks, Martin.
I have a question for you, Martin, actually.
Sure.
So I work in the transportation industry. And I'm still fuzzy on what constitutes a regionally significant project. So perhaps as a primer for this discussion, can you kind of go over again, like we have so many projects that we do as a region, and kind of what makes it a regionally significant project, and then how you want to like get that feedback from us in terms of, it looks like you're just looking at how we measure it and evaluate them, right? I think that's where we're getting at.
So that's the focus at right now, how we should measure these projects. So the federal law requires us essentially to evaluate anything that has a significant impact on the transportation system capacity, and leave some leeway to MPOs to define what that threshold is. Our current threshold is $100 million in impacting capacity, or $250 million, sort of any project on the transportation system, so transit and highways. But we were asked to reevaluate those thresholds, so we'll probably be doing that over the next couple of years.
Great. Kim?
Good morning, everyone. So I have a question. Is there an opportunity? What about, let me rephrase it. There are projects that are currently under construction.
Mhm.
Will that, I mean, there will be some benefits. Are the benefits of those capacity projects able to be incorporated into the study, or is it because they are already in construction, they can't be evaluated?
So this is a process we undertake every 4 years with each plan update. And it's really to make projects eligible to receive federal funding. And projects that are already under construction are, for the most part, already receiving those fundings. And so we're not going to cut them off. Typically, it would be pretty exceptional for us to cut something off that's under construction. But we could model that and just quantify the impacts, even if we're not sort of evaluating it in a sense.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. That's my question mainly, is about how do we capture those impacts, those positive impacts, or even negative impacts that has occurred from the results of those projects. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah. And that's a good point. We are sort of thinking about benefits and burdens as we do this, and we want to understand both sides. So.
Absolutely. Tiffany, I see your hand up.
Yes, hi, thank you. I wanted to see how you were, or if there was a way to add in some of the folks who tend to be disadvantaged or, marginalized from a lot of the development projects. Like, are they able to be included in the evaluation process or part of the team that's, looking at the data or even preparing an evaluation plan?
Yeah, so we've been really lucky. I already got to talk to our CARE group, which is a collection of community-based organizations from around the region, focusing on equity. And I got to spend a full day workshop with them talking about this project. And we're going to be going back to them for additional feedback about how we measure things and evaluate things. And so that's the key outreach we have at the moment, but we are definitely interested in more of that if we find the right venue or way to get that done.
Great. Thanks, Martin. Other questions? Other comments?
I have a question on the project evaluation measures. You had like 10 categories. Are those just in random order, or are they prioritized in some way?
They're probably in random order. Let's see. Yes, they're in somewhat random order. Sorry about that. There's no, at this point, we don't have a particular priority for those. As part of our evaluation framework, we might apply some sort of priority to different categories or things like that, but we haven't really decided on that. We've seen in our literature review that some groups do prioritize some measures over others, but we haven't determined if that's our path. So.
Good question, Joan.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Bob,
and I
it's
do-
Christy. Pardon me, it's Christy De Laurentiis. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
You know, I was wondering if you would be able to incorporate a retrospective look at past projects that have made the list, and sort of what the impacts are and analysis of those projects. I know, a decade or so ago, when there was the, there was some initiative to try to, for CMAP to get their arms around, I can't remember what the acronym was, but it was something like DRI, which was the, development that had regional impact. And many of those didn't come to fruition because of the softening of the, the downturn in the market and COVID and whatnot. So I'm wondering if there could be, maybe a timeline, or at least an analysis of what moved forward and what were those impacts, and how closely had CMAP anticipated what those might be.
Yeah, that's a great point. A lot of this information is driven by our travel model, which is somewhat forward-looking. But I agree that sort of looking back at past projects is important. That's something we've talked about here a little bit, sort of as part of other projects, specifically as part of our Title VI and sort of assessment and analysis. But I think it's a good point to sort of keep us grounded when we're doing all these models and projections to look backwards. So I'll take that note. No, appreciate that comment.
Thanks, Christy, for that. Other questions or comments for Martin?
I do have one more slide. If we can go to the next slide. We are looking for people who want to be part of these working groups to sort of dig in deep on some of the measures. And we hope to come back to the committees with our lessons learned this summer from our looking at the measures. And then we will come back in the fall again to talk about sort of this framework for evaluating the measures and how to process the data. So appreciate your time.
Well, we appreciate your work. Thank you, Martin. Great job. Let's move on then. The last item on the agenda is an update from staff regarding CMAP's work to develop a transit system report, the plan of action for regional transit part. As you recall, we're going to be discussing part in the report at all of our meetings this year. It's important stuff. So let me turn it over to staff.
Thanks, Bob. Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Scott. I'm a principal policy analyst at CMAP, and I'm the principal who's coordinating this project primarily, along with our project manager, Daniel Como. This is really an all-hands effort at CMAP, though. I want to be clear on that. And so what we wanted to do with the discussion today is give you an update. We were sort of at the beginning of our process in January when we were here before. So I want to remind you kind of what's happening with this and what's important and what are the top line takeaways, and give you a preview of where we think we're going in terms of the collection of policies that we're going to be pursuing through the summer. And, let people get a taste of what that is, so that if there are things that you are particularly interested in and would like to connect kind of offline, or you have a resource you think that we should be aware of that maybe we're not, so please keep that kind of top of mind as we go along. And then the second piece of it is going to be Elizabeth Ginsburg, who's also a member of the team, talking to you about where we think we might be landing on proposed changes to the state and local sales tax. So we know that you all are the ones who are going to really understand the potential there and the impacts there. So we want to, get some feedback on that. But before we get into it, I will remind you where we're at and give you the preview of where we're going policy wise. We've had hundreds of hours of meetings with people since we talked to you last. I mean, this is like the level of effort here is that we have over 4,000 hours of staff time scheduled. We have 4 consultants. We have like a bazillion people. This is a big deal to us. And if you find yourself wondering, I didn't think this is typically what CMAP's role would be. Why are you how did this come to be? It's because last year, the legislature passed and the governor signed a public act requiring CMAP to develop a report of recommendations for how we're going to move forward with the region's transit system, because the situation that we are currently in is quite serious and is going to need everybody to be part of the solution. Next slide here. So we're working on it. And the top line piece is that, because of the way COVID accelerated some of the issues that we were already having, and the way COVID has prevented people from returning to transit, we are facing down, starting in 2025 and really coming home in 2026, a better part of $1 billion operating shortfall. And just to give you some context, that's about 20% of the overall budget for transit. And if we were going to cut enough from the existing service to make up that budget gap, because so many of the costs are fixed, we would be talking about losing 40–50% of the transit service that's currently provided in the region, which, I know I don't have to tell this group that that's an unacceptable outcome. So we're looking at this and trying to figure out what it is that we're going to do. Okay, next slide. And so we've organized the work into sort of 3 streams, I guess you could say. They're all related to each other, but for the sake of organizing our teams and having conversations, we're having to divide it a little bit. So the first kind of work stream we've called the system we want. And this is about, it's kind of about build back better. It's about, we don't want to go back to 2019. We want to use this as an opportunity to surge forward and think about the system that a global city region like Chicago really needs and deserves, and to use this as an opportunity to make some progress on things like coordinated bus priority infrastructure system in the region. So like more BRT. We have less, fewer lane miles of BRT than really any of our peers. And we think there's an opportunity to do something about that, to address this whole system, ADA accessibility, to think about how transit can evolve to adapt to changing travel patterns, because we know, although the majority of people who work in this region work in jobs that cannot be done remotely, there are a lot of people whose kind of travel has changed and their commute needs have changed. So how do we think about that and adapt to a changing demand situation? So we're thinking about that. And then, of course, safety, security, and cleanliness is really top of mind for everybody right now. I mean, if you saw WBEZ's email this morning about the CTA is doing spring cleaning and is going to bring in power washers and everything, it's in the newspaper a lot. So obviously, this stuff is top of mind for us as well. So that's one piece of it. Next slide, please. The other piece of the kind of system we want work stream is thinking about, and really all of this is about how can we better position transit to be people's first choice, because we know that that's what we need to do to meet our climate goals in the region. And so transit needs to be affordable, attractive, like an experience that people can prefer. And so another piece of this is trying to make some progress on fare integration and affordability. So, maybe we need a low-income fare subsidy or free fares for youth, while at the same time creating a system where you don't have to essentially buy a new ticket every time you go onto a new operator. We think that could unlock some mobility benefits for people. So thinking about how we can move forward on that. Regional rail is an idea basically where we would support Metra's efforts to continue to evolve their operating model. Maybe it's not, we send a lot of trains in the morning rush and in the evening rush and nothing in between. Maybe it's more frequent, clock facing, all day kind of service, a Metra that looks a little bit different than how it is now, exploring what's actually possible with the infrastructure we have and what the costs would be, and what would need to be provided to kind of evolve that service into something that better fits what people seem to be wanting. And then you all will know that there are tremendous opportunities around transit-supported land use policies. So particularly outside of the city of Chicago, we're thinking things like, if there are fewer people parking in metro parking lots, what might the development opportunities be there for housing, for jobs, and to kind of cultivate more transit-supportive land use and vibrant places. I thought particularly some of you all might be interested in giving ideas on that. You know, we are giving a report to the state. So if there are things that the state could or should do that would enable more TOD, particularly in a suburban context, that's the kind of feedback that we would love to get, you know, from you all as we're going along on this. And so that's the sort of build back better, surge forward, the system we want work stream. The next work stream we're calling how to implement it, which is basically just the practicality of, if the region and the state raise a bunch of new money for transit, how is that going to be managed? How do things work between the different entities that compose our transit system? Are there any governance updates that would be helpful in getting us to implement kind of the other policies that have been identified? You know, what we're hearing from people is that many stakeholders would like to see a higher level of coordination among the service boards and the RTA compared to where we are right now. But exactly what that looks like, we're having a lot of conversations about. But you all, I'm sure, will appreciate that the how you get it done. The how is as important as the what, and often, you know, more important. So how can we facilitate like actually achieving what we're trying to do here? And then next slide, the last piece is how are we going to pay for it? So we say we want to do some improvements to the system, and we want to meet the crisis that is facing us. That's going to require some hard stuff on revenues. So the revenues that we're looking at, you know, I kind of previewed this for you, is sales tax, but we're also thinking about the role that like tolling or the movement towards a congestion pricing system could have in supporting transit. There's a good nexus there, because the more people who take transit, the less congested the roads are. So it makes sense that actually that there could be contribution from the roadside to support transit. There's a good nexus, I guess we would say. Think about how the state could play a bigger role. And then we're also just exploring, to be honest, anything that we can think of that somebody else, that another state is doing, another region is doing, or that seems like it might be feasible. We're just in the process of looking under all the couch cushions, basically. So also, if you have any brilliant ideas on that, we welcome it from anyone. Alongside that, we're thinking, well, the transit has to come to the table too, in terms of raising their fares and looking for, you know, efficiencies and maybe other ways that they can generate their own revenue through cost sharing or whatever, you know, whatever the menu it is that they can do. I think they're fully there in terms of doing whatever it is necessary that's within their control to facilitate us getting, you know, getting to where we need to be on responding to this crisis. And then there's sort of an immediate thing where there's in statute a requirement that the transit system get 50% of its operating revenue from fares. And this is a sort of a antique at this point and is not going to be sustainable going forward. So in the immediate term, there will need to be some action with the state to figure out what a replacement of that looks like, whether we want something different or reduce it or continue to provide a waiver to the transit agencies. Something's going to have to be done on that. And we're also thinking about whether and how there might be a greater role the federal government can play. Although I will emphasize with you all that not every transit system is in this situation. It's basically the big old legacy system. So it's us, Washington, DC, Philadelphia, New York, Boston. We are the ones that are having this challenge, I guess. And so we anticipate that we will need a homegrown solution, and that, you know, expecting the federal government to handle it is not realistic. Although if they could contribute, that would be great. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. And before we turn it to Elizabeth to talk more about what we're thinking specifically on the sales tax, I realize I kind of like ran through that pretty fast. We have a ton of resources we can give people if anyone's interested in more depth or more conversation on any of these pieces. Kim.
Yeah.
I love this. I'm so glad that this is a continued discussion. You know, particularly transit supportive land use. In a former life and roles in municipal local government, I've had developers come to me as former directors of various municipalities throughout the Chicagoland region wanting to build on, they would have their own staff sit out there and kind of watch rush hour at metro stations. Hey, I see that this parking lot is underused and we'd like to buy it from Metro and put some mixed use development there. And so we will work with them in Metro, and it became very grueling and difficult to be able to pull those types of situations off because, you know, in the suburban context, you want those that reside in suburban areas to take Metro whenever possible. But, you know, Metro is very protective of parking, you know, and how do we create those opportunities in that proper balance of getting those out of cars onto Metro and having enough parking to accommodate that, but having the ability to also repurpose those parking lots that aren't as utilized into things that would be supportive of transit. And so that is something that I've struggled with again in previous planning roles. And so I think that's great that this is something that is still at the forefront and being looked at.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. If you have any ideas on the specifics of anything from like a procedural standpoint that we could recommend to improve, like we would be very happy to have that information.
I'll definitely think about it, as well as at the local level, because there are a lot of communities that are located along metro lines that may have municipal owned parking structures and lots that are being underutilized as well. So I'll think about that.
Yeah, that would be awesome. And I, you know, especially since Mike Horsting is here, RTA of course has a community planning program entirely focused on TOD. So I think there's a lot of desire to, you know, make progress here and see what would be possible. But we figure we're holding the microphone, so we know this is an important topic, and if there's something that is helpful that we can say about it, we want to do that.
I know before we turn it over back to Elizabeth, we've got a couple more hands. Peter, I think your hand was first.
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple of points, or three actually. First of all, on the issue of coordination with economic or investments of, you know, transit-oriented development, I've run into this a lot more with Metro than any other agency over my history. And it's really bumped into the fact that Metro doesn't see this as part of their core mission in connecting transit to economic development, either generally or specifically to immediate transit-oriented development. And I think one of the structural changes that I think needs to be made with respect to the law is to make explicit that the transit agencies, all three of them, and I'll get to the three in a second, but all three of them really have an explicit, as part of their calculus, understanding the role of transit in driving economic development and supporting local economic development, transit-oriented development, and so forth, so that it becomes a priority for them and not simply an argument that, well, ridership numbers don't show that we, you know, need to put a station here, even though the argument is if you add a station, you're going to actually open an area up for development. I noted that in a weird sort of way, we're returning back to the idea of the original construction of the rapid transit lines, which was done by actually real estate developers back in the early part of the 20th century, so as to actually get people out to new neighborhoods so that they can develop the neighborhood. So it was just the opposite then, but that was the role that was played. Second, one of the coordination issues that I've have felt has never made any sense because of lack thereof is that the separation of PACE and Metro. There's a historic reason for that. PACE was created to buy the private bus lines that were impoverished Wilmette bus. I used to take it when I was a kid, and all that. And so they demanded, Florence Boone demanded that we create a PACE to support the bus lines. I actually think that the two should be merged, PACE and Metra, so as to drive better coordination between those two transit systems that primarily serve the suburbs. And so that when you're talking about coordination of, when's the bus showing up? Does it show up when the train's showing up? That sort of thing, you drive it as part of as one planning agency, just like you have with the CTA. Third, on the revenue side, I was at that conference that was done at the Federal Reserve Bank, and I think one of the big messages coming out was you need to connect the new revenue sources with actual transit. There needs to be some sort of intuitive connection in terms of you're doing this on revenue, and this is why it makes sense with respect to transit. I don't know if sales tax, which has been a horse that we've been beating for 20, 30 odd years, is the way to do it. But it just a thought. And then finally, on the fare box recovery ratio, I've said this before, fare box recovery ratio was intended to be punitive to CTA when it was established in the mid-80s. And I know it because I was part of the legislative staff when we wrote the damn bill. And that was the basis for it. Now, oddly enough, it's introduced some demand for efficiencies within the CTA and the other agencies. So it has some benefit that it actually did force, at least the feeling is it's forced some attention to greater efficiencies. But it was, and ironically, it was Metra that was sort of chuckling over this because Metra was running a 60-some% fare box recovery ratio at the time in the 80s when this thing was done. So like I said, it was specifically targeted the CTA. It's an anachronism. It is punitive. It was designed to punish poor writers, it's long outlived its usefulness in the sense of, the sort of the 50% was arbitrary, by the way, but the idea that it was it achieved some meritorious of consequence. And I'll say with one caveat that one of the unanticipated results was that, in fact, it seems to have imposed some efficiency discipline in the process. What that should be, how you should design it, politically, I don't think you can get away with getting rid of it altogether, but I think there needs to be some way in which that can be made more flexible. That's it.
Thank you, Peter. That's great. Appreciate some of that history too. I know Kendra put some comments in the chat box. I'm sure staff is following those. She had to leave. Any other questions before we shift it over to Elizabeth? All right, Elizabeth. Oh, I'm sorry. What? Maybe Tara, did you have something quick?
Yeah, just a general question. In terms of the fare box recovery ratio, I know what it is here, and thank you so much, Peter, for the background on it. What about across the country? What have you seen, Elizabeth?
It's unusually high. Okay. That it's a kind of a typical performance measure that arrived around the same time for transit agencies, but we have some. They're not exactly peers because they're differently situated. But for instance, in LA, their transit needs to get 10% of its operating from fares, and I think they're sort of at the bottom of the big regions, and we're at the top.
Thank you.
Interesting. Elizabeth, thank you so much. We're going to tag team now to the other Elizabeth.
Yes, thank you. And I want to just say, Peter, I think we definitely hear you when you say that the relationship between sales tax and transit is weaker than we would hope. But I think just for context for everyone, in recent years, the sales tax and the state matches to the sales tax accounted for almost 2/3 of the revenue that has been coming in. And we've never actually hit the fare box ratio of 50%. So the sales tax has really been driving a lot of the revenues for the transit system historically. In January, we of course kind of shared with you that we've hired SB Friedman Development Advisors, and they're working on analyzing potential reforms to the sales tax as a part of the PART effort. And they've kind of identified these 3 options for future recommendations, and we wanted to bring them all with you and kind of share the work that's been done to date. The 3 options, as you can see here, there's kind of adjusting the existing sales tax rate, so increasing the rate to just collect more revenues from the sales tax on goods. A second option would be to broaden the sales tax to also tax services in the region and potentially the state. And then a third scenario is kind of a hybrid scenario, and I'll explain that more when I get there. The composite sales tax rate on general merchandise ranges from 9 to 11% in Cook County and about 7 to 9% in the collar counties. And increasing the portion of the rate that's associated with RTA, even by just 0.25%, could produce significant revenues to fill the anticipated funding gap that RTA has projected. However, as this map shows, we're very aware that the sales tax in Illinois is one of the highest in the country. And so any kind of increases to the rates will need to be kind of calibrated accordingly. And we're asking SB Friedman to look at any kind of externalities related to regional competitiveness. For the second option, this chart just really shows how much consumer spending has shifted over the last few decades. You can see that spending has shifted to services, kind of starting back in the late 1960s, and now most spending that consumers are doing is on services compared to goods. And yet in Illinois, we primarily tax sales on goods and not services. So that kind of sets us up for, there are a few reasons why it would make sense to start taxing services. In addition to kind of the shift in household spending, services are just a more stable revenue source. They spending on services doesn't react in the same way that spending on goods does when there's economic recessions or pandemics, for instance. And also a tax on services is more equitable than a tax on goods, as higher earners tend to spend more of their income on, higher earners tend to spend more of their incomes on services than lower income earners. Given all of that, SB Friedman has kind of been working to identify which service sectors make the most sense in a potential expansion of the sales tax to services. And it's important to really structure this service tax correctly by selecting the right services so that we're not creating tax pyramiding by taxing businesses, which would then just push those costs onto their consumers. So the ways that SB Friedman is thinking about this is kind of targeting high growth sectors and avoiding low growth sectors, avoiding business to business services and kind of focusing on those business to consumer services, and then also accounting for impacts on small businesses and again, impacts on interregional competitiveness. And the main areas that they have identified and are looking into further are recreational services, which includes campgrounds, dance studios, golf and country clubs, financial services, which includes kind of employment or hiring services, security services, and also investment counseling. And then kind of another category, which includes a plethora of things such as moving, garbage collection, sign construction, and even pet grooming. There is kind of this alternate hybrid scenario, and I just need to kind of go with me for a second, but I think right now, the state of Illinois levies a 6.25% sales tax rate, and then home rule counties and home rule municipalities can levy their own rates in addition to that. But that state sales tax rate is kind of divvied up between the state, which collects 5% or keeps 5%, 1%, which is distributed back to the municipality where those transactions occurred, and 0.25%, which typically goes to the county. But in Cook County, that 0.25% is redirected to the RTA. And what could potentially occur if we were to expand the sales tax to services is that not only would the RTA be able to collect more revenues, but the state would be able to collect more revenues to fund a variety of programmatic and other expenses. And so there is a possibility to kind of adjust the total sales tax rate that's levied by the state so that they're still collecting more revenues, they're still able to kind of meet other goals or other funding priorities that they have, but they're not levying the full 5% rate that they were previously. And that we're still really thinking about this, but we'd love to hear more about how you all are thinking about it. We know that going kind of in the state budget proposal that's right now, the state is really thinking about the impact that our current economic situation and high interest rates will have on future revenues. And so any revenues we can collect they may want to keep them on, but we're thinking about that. And with that, we did have kind of just this discussion question, and we'd love to hear what your reactions are to these sales tax reform options and any thoughts you all have on what we should keep top of mind as we continue to refine the recommendations.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, let's open it up. Christy De Laurentiis sent a note in the chat, which maybe is a good way to start that conversation, Elizabeth, which is the CMAP sales tax discussion and expansion of sales tax study related solely to transit funding sources or broader policy discussion? Great question.
Yeah, and I think that's where that kind of hybrid option comes in. If expanding, so any expansion of the sales tax to services would have to happen at the state level, and the state would be able to collect more revenues if they decided to kind of expand it across the state, which would produce more revenues for other policy priorities. And I guess we can think about kind of how many of those policy priorities we want to include in our own recommendations. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Others? Don't be shy.
Oh, Bob, can I just make a comment about that? So the state has generated a lot more revenue. Obviously, they're doing much better. They have the best fiscal condition that they've had in decades. They've increased 8 bond ratings. You know, they're moving in the right direction. They are watching forecasted revenues now because of, you know, the softening of the market and worry about inflation. But one thing that I will say is that a lot of the funds that they're new revenues that they're generating are getting obligated for the Build Illinois program, and not, you know, some of them, you know, discretionary funds that they're putting into rainy day funds and other things like that. But a lot of it is going into infrastructure. So curious to know whether or not you've explored whether or not there's a way to carve out a little slice of that in addition to, you know, expanded sales tax base.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Christy. And we are thinking about all of the transportation revenues in the state and whether there are opportunities to, I don't know, like link some different things to bring resources. I'm gonna, yeah, think about that a bit more. But I think another piece of this that's top of mind for us is that if the sales tax is, I think is reformed, modernized, not sure what the right word is here. If we make this adjustment to sales tax, would have downstream, potentially have positive downstream consequences for not just transit, but local municipalities, counties, and the state, and thinking about what that could enable or unlock. But it's a good flag to continue to think about the resources going to support Rebuild Illinois and how all this stuff comes together.
Other questions or comments? Okay, well, you do know where to find them if you have thoughts later. Thank you, Elizabeth, the law firm of Ginsberg and Scott. Let's move on to some of our last agenda items today. Committee member updates. I don't believe anything was submitted in advance, but do we have any that are out there? Okay, doesn't sound like it. Is there any new business to come before the committee?
I will add really quick, Kendra Freeman, before she left, put in the chat that MPC is having an event to launch their Reconnecting Communities report. I know CMAP has been looking at that report and thinking about how to kind of act on it. So I encourage everyone to take a look.
Great catch, Elizabeth. Thank you for that. Any other announcements? Any other new business? Okay, staff will now read any comments we've received prior to today's meeting and recognize those speakers in the chat box for public comment. Do we have any?
We did not receive any comments prior to the meeting, and I haven't seen anything in the chat. But just as a reminder, if any of the
Hello?
Oh,
It's
just a sec, Carly.
okay.
If anyone would like to address the committee, please just indicate so in the chat box. And Garland, if you would like to add something now, please do so.
Hi, good
Thanks.
morning, Garland.
Hi, everybody. It's Garland Armstrong, formerly of Des Plaines, Illinois, now living in Des Moines, Iowa. How's everybody doing there in the Chicagoland area?
We're doing well, Garland. Hope you're well too, sir.
Yeah, I am. I want to bring up some suggestions about that. I think you should remind the disability community, since y'all said we're deeply concerned too about y'all with the fiscal cliff coming in 2026. I think the ADA should be well prepared, not only where you are, but maybe downstaters too should know about it too, because I think with the transit and maybe some other parts of the transit too, that's going to be in a fiscal cliff, they should be well prepared to see what they can help out, coming with some good strategic ideas, and so they can make sure the state lawmakers there will be well prepared for this. And also remind the federal part lawmakers that they should be ready for this, because they'll say once they see the data of it, God forbid, they're gonna have their hands up in the air concerning about this. So I think y'all should be making sure not only the state lawmakers should know about this, but remind the federal part too, because the federal side needs to be well aware of it too, so that y'all can coordinate and see what to do to be well prepared if y'all go into it, because we don't know what they're thinking of. So just to give you the heads up on it, so stay on top of it if they feel like they're going to try to dodge y'all, because we don't want this to be extremely happen, not just in one state, but some other states to see that they're going in the same situation. So I think the time right now is to show them everything what you need so that they could be well prepared to coordinate together and everything, because God forbid, we don't want to be extremely deficit like other countries who is doing the surpluses. So we want to make sure what kind of strategy ideas we need to work on to get this well prepared. So that's my suggestion of that. So make sure the federal part needs to know about it too, and everybody else.
Great.
Locally, statewide, federal, stakeholders, everything.
Amen, Garland. Good to
Yeah,
see you as always.
and also just want you all to pray for Heather too, because on April 9th, April 12th, April 17th, her blood sugar crashed and she was in the hospital, got discharged. And then this past Sunday, Monday, her left leg hurt her and she fell. And I thought her blood sugar was going to crash again, but thank goodness they got it up. So just want y'all to pray for her. And it's a lot of stress on me. And more good news too. We're coming back to the Chicagoland area in June. It'll be June 13th, and then we're leaving on June 22nd. So it'll be so emotional to see everyone for the first time at the new CMAP post office. It's been 2 years since we left the Chicagoland area. So we'll be back to see y'all again.
Well, that'll be great. Garland, so good to see you. Our thoughts are with you and with Heather. Please pass that along to her. And we'll hopefully see you very soon, sir. And please stay well to both you and Heather in the meantime. Any other public comment?
Thanks, Bob.
Of course. Any other public comment? All right. Well, the next committee meeting is that in-person meeting we talked about on July 27th in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. So mark your calendars now. If there's no other business to come before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you all. Be well. Take care.
You take care, Bob. And and don't work too hard, and make sure that you don't want to be under the same situation like me.
That's good advice for all of us. Thank you, Garland. Take care, everyone. Be well.
All right, bye.